Callisto protocol was definitely a big surprise for me, and I think it's a big thing it runs on Mac. But let me explain why first. The game was released mere 2 years ago, which makes it quite recent. It was created in a modified version of Unreal Engine 4, and it also includes some elements of Unreal Engine 5. As you might know, Unreal Engine 5 introduces a lot of new features that can be really taxing on computing resources. And last thing, it's a Windows game, not a native Mac port. So running a Windows game on Mac in general is quite a big thing. To run the game, you will need a tool called Whisky or a crossover application. Links for each one can be found in description below this video. Whisky is a free tool, so you can download it and use it for free. On the other hand, Crossover is a paid application, but it offers 2 weeks free trial, so you can download and try it for free. As for the video, I usually prefer not to get too technical. I don't want to have, just one game scene compared in each preset. My goal is rather to give you some general overview of performance and my experience with the game. However, this time I've gone a bit more in depth, so you can expect some visual and performance comparison screens as well. The game offers several graphical presets from low to ultra, including options for temporal and FSR2 upscaling. For this video I stick to the presets for each resolution scale, but if you are interested in more technical details about performance, I've prepared a detailed Google Sheet. The link is also in the description below this video. Here you can view the FPS count for each resolution, grouped by preset and upscaling type. These numbers are taken from one specific scene for all the options. This is also a scene where I experienced some performance drops, so you can expect the game will run much smoother most of the time. And one small warning here. This game is a horror game and a really bloody one, so expect some scenes may contain a lot of violence, blood and gore. So that's for the explanation for today, and let's go to see the game's performance. The amount of FPS is really high with this config. It can reach around 120 FPS in some areas. We have lowest settings and low resolution, so it performs in really high FPS state, as you might expect. And even on some fighting scenes the FPS is still pretty high, around 80 or 90 FPS, so the game is definitely very smooth and playable in this config. Here we have another scene, and as expected the game still works smoothly without any issues. However, there can be some artifacts seen on screen on some spots like bars, metal grids or cables, thanks to the low resolution, which can also be expected. But otherwise definitely playable. I noticed basically no difference in visuals when using medium settings during the gameplay, but if we look at FPS counter, it is lower than in a low settings preset, and I would say that the difference between low and medium is maybe a little more than I would expect. But even though the FPS hover around 50, there is no noticeable tearing or slowdown in the game's performance. Surprisingly, the game remains smooth throughout. Also in heavy scenes, the game provides a seamless experience without any struggles.
that is as long as you don't get killed by one of those monsters. And here we have one of such scenes where we are surrounded by multiple enemies, creating a bit of struggle. But in this case it's just some silly monster, making it not any issues with the game's performance. But I must admit, I must be a terrible player to scare away a monster. The FPS here are hovering from 40 to around 70, which is again a little lower than in previous preset. However, I still don't see any difference in visuals. I also didn't experience any difference in gameplay. It still feels surprisingly good and smooth. There are of course some heavier scenes where you can notice some small tearing, but usually you just walk through and forget about it in next second. So even in this case, it's still a very pleasant gaming experience. And for those of you who enjoy a bit of gory thrill, the lack of visual and performance compromise even at higher settings means you can enjoy the game's brutality and bloodshed in exquisite detail. Just remember, it's all just fun and game until the screen starts to look a little too realistic. In most cases the game runs surprisingly smoothly, gliding through scenes with ease. But one thing I've certainly observed here with this setting, and that is a slight input lag in some cases. Especially in more demanding rooms with a lot of particles and features like this one for example, where the FPS drops below 40, you can noticeably feel the performance drop and some input lag. The highest FPS peak also doesn't go over 60 here. Overall, the game performs not the best, it's still okay, but occasionally due to the lag, it feels a little sluggish, like you are walking through mud.
Wise? They can't track us.
Prison systems are breaking down like that elevator back there. Just stay out of their line of sight and you should be able to sneak by.
No movement detected.
Here we have first comparison screen. I decided to use this one because this is just a regular room with some particles and some fumes and effects, so we can compare the difference. And the second room I choose to use for the comparison is a little more resources demanding. You can definitely see a difference in FPS as well. The first thing that I noticed here is definitely a monster pinned to the wall. The second thing is the visual, thanks to the higher resolution, is much better, and the gameplay experience went back to enjoyable state, so the mentioned input lag in Ultra preset with 1080p is gone. Definitely more playable and visually appealing than in 1080p. Unless necessary, I would rather use 1440p in low settings than 1080p Ultra. Or you can use any other tool that can break a monster skull if one likes to use tools this way, of course. I also didn't find any artifacts on grids and cables like in 1080p. I found just some cuddly cute worms every now and then in crates like this one. In 1440p and medium preset we can see that the monsters has changed to humans again. This is one of the more computer demanding scenes as well, so we can see that the FPS are a little lower, but once again the experience from the game is just so smooth that I just couldn't believe that even below 40 it can still be so enjoyable and playable. Here we have another secret footage from one of the local meat stores. I forgot its name unfortunately. But as you can see, here we have some details again, like fog, particles and smoke. But still it is holding up quite well. However, one could use some ventilation here for sure. Here I can still experience pretty smooth gameplay most of the time, except of some specific areas of the game and in some fights. As I've tried so far, it was okay for most of the time, but for a better experience I would maybe tweak some settings like upscaling quality to balanced or consider switching to medium preset. Here we are in another battle scene, facing a monster that seemed eager to be challenged by my fighting skills. I just hope it found the relief it was looking for and enjoyed the encounter as much as I enjoyed playing the game with these settings. Even though the game runs quite smoothly with these settings, I decided to pay a visit to the local laundry. Given everything I've been through in the game so far, I concluded that some new shorts might come in handy. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any of the stuff there, so let's just hope this doesn't lead to any unexpected events in the future. Average amount of FPS with these settings are around 30 most of the time, higher in some cases. Aiming is becoming a little harder, so unless you want to crank up game's difficulty a little more, you can try that, but in shooting games like this one you really don't want that. Input lag is back again for sure, and that's another reason why I would avoid playing the game with these settings. I don't like it at all. There are spots where the FPS can peak around 50, making the game relatively playable. However, when the game switches between 30 and 50 FPS, it doesn't make for a good experience and feels disruptive. When the game runs steadily, even in lower FPS, you can get used to it after a while. But there's definitely a setting out there that can offer a better gameplay experience. Here's our second comparison shot, and once again I've picked two different locations within the game to showcase. This particular scene caught my eye due to the abundance of particle and lighting effects that really bring the environment to life. In the second scene, we encounter yet another location that demands more from our hardware. I personally don't see a reason why this spot is more demanding on resources. There are some scenes with more particles and effects and a higher FPS level. The visual aspect of 4K resolution is an improvement even on low preset. The image looks really clear and crisp. Performance, on the other hand, it is okay for most of the time. The FPS hover between 35 and 60. It is playable, but with some compromises. One thing I noticed here: the game lost a bit of its smoothness, even in scenes with more FPS in 4K than in some other scenes with less FPS in 2K, which is quite strange. You can play it, but the feel from the game is little different. Like this guy, for example, I can definitely feel it in some of my body parts. Here's another battle scene. I encountered this fellow while searching for the janitor. Sadly, he wasn't keen on letting me meet the janitor in person. He just couldn't grasp my reasoning for wanting to. But in the end, he couldn't just resist my persuasive arguments and was compelled to let me pass. The visuals here seems to be more or less the same, but the game is slower for sure. The FPS counter doesn't go above 40 FPS. Input lag is still okay for this part, but you may find some difficulties in some fighting scenes when trying to aim a certain spot. I honestly didn't like it is getting slower, so I didn't spend much time with this config. If you want to try it in 4K, stay in low preset, but it seems that the game will start to be not so good experience from now on. I also gave it a shot, pinning another monster to the wall, hoping it might somehow relieve the sting of decreasing performance. It provided a brief moment of satisfaction, alas, only fleeting. Yet it felt like a small victory. Even in this scene where I stumbled upon another pet that seemed eager for a cuddle and looked quite charming, the joy of discovering it couldn't make up for the frustration of lost performance. Nonetheless, it was an attempt worth making, a small consolation in the midst of our technical woes. So, thanks for the small moment of respite. With higher graphics details comes lower FPS, as one might expect. Things are really getting serious here, the FPS drop is significant. There were times when gaming at such frame rates was common thing, so if you want to experience how it was back in the day, this is really the way to go. Be warned however, the lower FPS might substantially affect your aiming skills, but not in a good way. With this aiming, it becomes more Souls-like game than third-person shooter / adventure game. There is basically nothing more to say for this part, except of little warning. The next scene is little more bloody and meaty than usual. The game really starts to drag in most areas. There are spots where the FPS dips below 20 make it more or less unplayable. But if the struggle of battling hordes of monsters you encounter in game isn't painful enough, you can always crank it up to ultra settings in 4K and experience the added ordeal of low performance. Or if you enjoy playing games that feel like you are flipping through a comic book, the choppy frame rate might just offer that effect. Plus, with the game running like this, there's no need for a photo mode. You can easily snap a picture-perfect shot right in the middle of the action. By the way, do you remember when I said it is like running through a mud? You should definitely try it in this location. Shifting to one serious note to clarify one thing here for those who doesn't know how it works. It's important to understand that the slow performance isn't due to the insufficient hardware. Instead, it's the result of the transitions layer complex calculations required to adapt the game from its original Windows environment to run on Mac. This layer acts as a bridge, and while it enables us to play these games on a different platform, it also introduces a significant processing overhead that can impact on a game's speed. Here we are at the last comparison screen in 4K resolution. Once again, I've chosen two visually interesting parts of the game. The difference in the details can particularly be seen in fumes, though I'm not sure if the level of detail is worth the trade-off. For the second scene, I chose this room where we can see a lot of particles behind the window and the texture on the floor looks quite interesting, so I definitely wanted to compare the difference on one screen. This game is definitely not my thing. It is a little too bloody and violent for my taste, but even so, I really enjoyed spending the time in this game. It runs smoother than it may seem, the visuals are great, and I believe it is definitely worth trying. And even so that the game is too much violent for me, I really would like to see native port of this game. It is probably the most resource demanding Windows game that I've tried on Mac so far, so seeing how well it runs on Mac is impressive, especially considering the complex calculations that take place in the background thanks to the tools that makes it all happen. It is definitely not without flaws. You can experience some input lags, especially in higher graphical presets. But seeing such game running like this using a transition layer really makes me wonder how it would perform if it was a native version. So what do you think, guys, about the performance of this game? Would you be interested in trying it on your Mac? And how about a native version? Is that something you would like to see? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really looking forward to read what you all think.